So often, a lot of people are encouraged to set up a trust, and they're encouraged under these different circumstances. One, when a person is wanting to cater for minor kids in case they may just pass away just prior to them being adults. And number two, they're also encouraged to utilize trust when it comes to property preservation. Number three, they are also often encouraged to utilize trusts if they want to attain generational wealth. Why? What are the benefits? Why is it such a necessity? Why are people always nagging about a trust when it comes to these three different instances? We're going to talk about this just now, but before we do so, I just want to greet the people that are new here. Hi there. My name is Yolanda Mnyengeza. I'm an attorney and a director at a law firm here in Johannesburg, South Africa. And to the returners, welcome back. It's good to have you here. So let's not waste time. Why is it necessary when you have minor kids to set up a trust? Why is it necessary if you want to preserve property for you to set up a trust? Why is it necessary for you to set up a trust if you want to attain generational wealth? Let's get into it. So what is a trust? First things first. Now, a trust is a relationship between three parties, right? And it's a fiduciary relationship. You'll understand why I'm saying fiduciary relationship just now. So this relationship is often started by the person we call the founder, which is you, the person who decides to start or set up a trust, right? So this particular founder sets up a trust that's going to benefit certain individuals or other entities, whatever it is. Now, these people who are going to benefit, we call them beneficiaries. And in addition, in this relationship, we have people we call trustees. What's the purpose of trustees? So trustees have the role of ensuring that these people we call beneficiaries get what is due to them, right? Either by their own discretion or alternatively based on what has been stipulated on the trust deed. If the trust deed says these people who are beneficiaries must get 5,000 Rand a month, then the trustees have that responsibility of ensuring that the funds flow from the trust to the beneficiaries. So you understand a bit about the trust? So it's like an independent entity that operates for the benefit of beneficiaries. So now that we've defined a trust, why is it encouraged to be utilized when people have minor kids? So one of the things you'll see is that most people take out things like policies and they often have things like investments. Why? When they have minor kids. Reason being is that they understand that there is a possibility that they may just pass away before those children are actually able to cater for themselves fully. And so what they understand as well is that it's possible if this happens, those children will not have anyone who's going to cater for their needs because they were playing that role. And they were playing that role because they had an income. So when they are not there, it means not only are they physically not there to to do what is necessary for those children, but also their income has been taken away. So then they take out things like a policy and an investment. Now, the problem with this is when you then nominate that these kids must get this, and you happen to pass away when they're still young, they can't access that amount of money because they are under the age of 18. So what South African law says is that in this instance, this money that belongs to these children has to then go to the Government Guardians Fund, who's going to have fiduciary control of these funds. So then whoever's taking care of those kids will have to continuously go to the Government Guardians Fund yearly to get a certain amount, right? And the Government Guardians Fund will then determine what they give to them. So often this is not so practical, right? In many instances, hence we have a lot of billions that are sitting at the Government Guardians Fund, and often people struggle with the process of claiming. So this is where a trust is often recommended. Why? Because if you, for example, were to establish this trust, what you would then do is to not give those children or name those children as the people who must get the funds, because if they're young, they can't get them, right? So instead, you would establish a trust and then say the funds must be redirected and go to the trust, meaning that you make the beneficiary the trust, right? If you have a policy, you make the trust a beneficiary of that policy, and then the funds go to the trust. What happens when these funds get there? When these funds get there, they then will be distributed to the guardian of the minor children that you have in the way in which you have stipulated, right? And the nicest thing about this is that they've got ease of access, right? And they have not only ease of access to the funds that they're going to need, but they have ease of access to the people that are dealing with these funds. And plus, you can cater for those children the way in which you want. If you had made children accustomed to a lifestyle that probably requires for each child to get something like 20,000 Rand, it's best you utilize your trust, because you can simply say, this is what they must get and their lifestyle must be maintained. Unlike you and allowing for the funds to go elsewhere, where the guardian will not have this wiggle room to cater for a certain lifestyle, because they will be required, or they will be given rather, what is necessary to take care of that child, which may not necessarily be what you had made a child accustomed to. So this then is the reason often you would be encouraged to do what? To set up a trust. Number one, to make funds easily accessible to your children and to accommodate a certain lifestyle that you probably would have created for those kids. And also for flexibility purposes, right? In a trust, you can incorporate any condition. If you believe that children need to get certain things that may not be deemed as necessary, you can incorporate those things in the actual trust, and the children would get such things. So you have a lot of freedom with regards to this. So hence, it is often encouraged that you do set up a trust. Number two, why are you encouraged to set up a trust if you're thinking about property preservation? Another issue, property preservation. So often, let's talk about it from the context of family homes or farmlands. Now, in these instances, often the idea is that people want the properties to stay in the family. I don't want it to be sold. People have these sentimental ideas, right, about certain properties, and they're like, I don't want it to be sold. The problem is this: if you then leave it to individuals, you cannot necessarily dictate what they must do with the property in the future, right? They might not necessarily agree with what you said, or they might be in a situation that, that pushes them to say, you know what, I think we should sell. And that will be the end of it. So that's why often, if you have this idea that I don't want the property to be sold, or a specific property to be sold, you are encouraged to consider something as a trust. Why? Here's the thing. If you were to place a property under a trust right now or at your death, no one will have ownership of that property, because it will be belonging to a trust, and these ones have the right to benefit from it. So even if the circumstances now change and they feel like they need money, it's not within their control, to sell that property, because that property is just meant to benefit them. So what does the trust do for you? It ensures that the property is preserved and protected, and therefore kept in the family. That's why you'll often hear people say, consider a trust if you don't want properties to be lost, or to be preserved rather in the family for the longest of time. Let's go to scenario number 3. Scenario number 3. Why would you be encouraged to consider a trust if you are someone who's talking about generational wealth? Let's start there. What is this thing of generational wealth? So generational wealth simply means your wealth surviving let's say for 2 generations and more. So often, you know what happens when you pass away, you leave your things in the form of inheritance, right? And they get inherited by the first generation just after you. Excuse me. So after they've been inherited by the first generation after you, there's no guarantee that they're going to have those properties also roll over to the next generation. And often people will say, you know what, I think I have enough to cater not only for the generation after me, but also for the next one and probably the next 2 generations. And therefore, I want to establish a way of doing this. This is when people are encouraged to set up a trust. Let's talk about it in a practical sense. For example, if you have things like properties that generate an income, and you want not only your children to benefit, but their children and their children's children, the best way to do this is under a trust. Like I mentioned before, possibly if you were to leave it to the first generation here, they could easily sell those properties or even burden those properties, and those properties could end up being lost. And also, another example, let's say you have money in the form of a policy, and you know for a fact that there's enough money to last for the longest of time. And so often people will say, you know what, let it be a form of generational wealth to the family to assist and cater for not only one generation, but also another and another. So that's when a trust would come into play. Because what does the trust do? The trust restricts access to whatever it is that you have placed in it. If you, for example, give me 5 million today, there's no guarantee at the end of the year I'll still have it, because I am in control of those funds, right? And I can do as I please. And unfortunately, you cannot impose your ideologies on me. If I don't agree with them and I want to spend the money, I'll spend it. But now, if you say, you know what, I'll put it in a trust, what happens then is that you can put in conditions to restrict the kind of access I can have. For example, maybe in a year, I can only access 100,000 Rand. And there isn't much that I can do if you have properly drafted and structured this trust. So I'm just going to have to make do with the 100,000 Rand. So what does this mean in a practical sense? It means that 5 million that you would have given to me now is going to last much longer, right, than it would have had you left it to me. So that's the context or the idea that people often have when they're talking about generational wealth, hence the introduction or the recommendation that they utilize something such as a trust, because it has terms and conditions which must be followed to the T. So people can't just decide, no, we'll do differently. If the person who started or set up this trust, which is you, the founder, said that only a certain portion or a certain amount must be accessed by beneficiaries in a year, people can't go above and beyond that because the terms have been established already. So this is where or why a trust then becomes useful. Guys, there's a lot of things we can talk about when it comes to trust, but today let's stick to these 3 scenarios. I hope this helped you. Listen, if you think it could help another person, share, like, come back, because we'll have much more of this content. As you know, my name is Yolanda Mnyengeza. I'm an attorney and a director at a law firm here in Johannesburg, South Africa. I will see you next time.